Hello coders, welcome back to another video. In this video, we are going to be covering a new topic that will be very useful in your programs going forward. So today's topic is going to be on methods. Methods are used in Java to help you repeat certain amounts of code. Now, you may be thinking, is this similar to a loop? No. So basically what a method is it's a block of code that runs when you call it. So within a method, you can put any lines of code that you want. It doesn't matter the number of lines of code within a method. And anytime you want to run those set lines of code, all you have to do is call one line, which is the method or the method name. So today we are going to show you how to do that. So when it comes to methods, they are typically declared within a class. So if you look on our screen, we already have a class created, and it is called methods, public class methods. So we will be creating methods inside of this class. Now, when it comes to working with methods, you do not have to create them inside of the main method. So as you may have known, up until this point, everything we've done has pretty much been made within this main method. So basically, when you're creating other methods, you don't have to create them inside of the main method. So the main method itself is a method. So anytime we run the main method, anything inside of that executes. So the same thing is going to apply for the ones that we're going to create in this tutorial. So typically, when you create methods, you want to create them within the class. And if you are going to use them in the main method, which we will be doing, you want to make sure that you create that method above the main method. So we're going to create our methods above the main method. So we're going to go ahead and just tab down our main method to create some space. So now let's jump right into creating methods. So there's various ways you can create methods in Java. It kind of just depends on your end goal. Everyone's end goal is going to be different, but there are various ways to create methods. So we'll go ahead and create one method. So example 1. So when it comes to creating methods, the first thing you want to do is you're going to state the access modifier. So a modifier is basically telling you how you can access that method. So is the method going to be public or private? So the difference between the two, if you see within our examples, most of our access modifiers so far have been public. So public means that any program or any set of code can access whatever that object is. Whereas if it's private, a private method means it would only exist within this class, the methods class. So generally, most people do make their methods public. They make them public because you don't know whether you're going to need to use a method that exists in one program in another program. So if you create it as public, then it allows you to reuse it within other Java programs. If you make it private, it makes it a little harder and you'll have to go back and change it. But there are those cases where you may want to just have a method private for that specific program. And if that's the case, you can use that there. So we're going to start off and just create a public method that can be accessed by any other program. So the first thing we need to do is public. The next thing that comes is going to be the actual data type, right? So the data type is going to say what type of data is the method working with. So in this example, we'll go ahead and work with integers. So we'll say int. Now in this case, we're going ahead and name this method. So what is the name of the method that we want to use? Are we going to use, method 1? Are we going to give it a customized name? That's up to you. In most cases, you want to customize the method name to be whatever the method is doing. That way it helps you tell you later on when you call it what's actually going on in that method. So in this case, we're going to create a method called add numbers. Okay, so now we have this method called add numbers, and it's saying that it's going to be working with integers and it's a public method. So we'll go ahead and add the parentheses after that. Adding parentheses tells your program that add numbers is a method. So you have to make sure you include the parentheses after the method name for it to register it as a method. And once you have that, you want to go ahead and add the curly braces. So that will go ahead and create our method. Now, if you see here, we're getting an error. So the first error that it's giving us is that this method must return a result of type int. So when you're declaring that data type, we're basically saying whatever is coming from this method is going to be an integer value. So what this error is telling us right now is that we have to do one of two things. Either within our method, we use a return statement, or we are going to actually create this method to have the return type of void. So for right now, we're just going to go ahead and use the add return statement way, and we'll go back and show the void method later. So right now, as you see here, it says we must return a result of type int. So that's what we need to do. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our numbers that we're going to be working with, because we need to return those numbers later on. So let's start by doing that. So first, as you know, create your integer variables, and we're just going to create two. So I'm going to say int x equals 10, and then I will say int y equals 25. All right. So now we have two integer variables to work with in our code. Now, if you see by the method name, we said add numbers. So we need to create a variable that's going to hold our numbers when it's added. So add numbers, and we're going to go ahead and say int sum equals x plus y. And that's going to add our numbers together. So now we have a variable that's going to hold the sum of the numbers. Okay? So that's one example. So we still don't have our return statement. So we need to do that. So a return statement is basically saying that we're going to return some value to the user. So to return our value, we're going to use the return keyword in all lowercase. So if you were to do it like this, it's not going to work. That is not how you do a proper return statement. However, if you look at the top, we no longer have the error on that add numbers. So it did fix that issue. Now, we didn't use return statement properly. So when you use the return statement, you have to tell it what to return. So I just said return. So now I need to tell it what am I returning. And in this case, I want to return sum. So as you see now, we simply fixed our error, and now there are no red lines. And this is going to return the sum of the numbers to the user. All right. So now we've created our first method. That's our very first method, and it's called add numbers. So just to show you how this works, in the case that you want to run this program, if we were to run it, then you see nothing is happening. We ran it, nothing happened. We don't see anything down here. The reason you don't see anything down here is because you never told your program to run the method we created. There's nowhere in here that we're calling the method. So for us to actually have that method run and show us some information, we need to call it. So this can be done inside of our main method. So working with the main method, in here, you can simply place or call the method that you want to work with. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and create or call that method. So to call the method, you need to remember the exact name of the method. So in our case, it's add numbers. And when you call it, you have to follow it up by the empty parentheses for it to understand what you're calling. So this is not the official call. I'm just showing you how you would simply call the name of a method, and this is how you would do so. By calling that name and matching it to whatever you did up here. Now, you don't have to specify this part of the method. You don't have to say public int. All you're going to do is call the method name in the parentheses. So that's what we've done here. Now, as you see here, we have another error. And if we click on this, it tells us to assign the statement to a new variable. So we would have to assign it to a variable. Now, what would our variable be? You have to take a look at your return data type. And in our case, it's going to be an integer, which means we would have to create an integer variable. So int, we'll say N1 is going to equal add numbers, like that. So now that we got our method created and stored in a variable called N1, you see we still get an error. And that's because we did not set up our method properly. So yes, we don't have any errors, but when we're trying to call the method, it is not set up properly. So as you see here, it says cannot make a static reference to the non-static method add numbers from the type methods. Okay, so I know that's probably like a lot for you to digest, so let's break this down. So static means that the method is going to belong to the class that it's in, but it does not have to have an object of the main class. So we have not created an object yet, so that is probably why this could be a little confusing, but an object is just an instance of the class that allows you to work with methods. So we'll create objects in a few minutes, but for this case, you don't necessarily always have to create an object to work with methods within a class. So in this case, you could create it as a static method. So to do that, you simply would create the static method. Oops. Put it right here. Static. Okay. Now, adding this keyword static right after public will turn this add numbers to static. And remember, that will allow us to create the method to belong to the class that we're working with. And we don't have to create an object to use it. So as you see now, this has fixed our issue here. There's no longer an error here, which is exactly what we want. So if you were to run this, nothing's going to happen again because basically we're not telling it what to do. When you return something, that does not mean it prints it to the user. It just means it returns that value. So when we're calling this, N1 is holding the value of a certain number. So that number that is created in here is what is now stored in N1. So whatever sum is basically the equivalent of N1 right now. So for us to see it, we would have to call it within a print statement. So if I were to do a print statement, and I already had it created, so if I were to say I want to print out N1, and then we run this, then you see it now prints out the value of 35, which is 25 plus 10. So that is how we now see what is returned from our add numbers method. Okay? So this is just printing the value of the return sum from add numbers. And this is a variable to hold the value of add numbers. Okay? So that's basically what we did in this example. We have created a static method and we created a variable to hold whatever is being returned from that static method and printing it out. So in here, we could also say that the sum of 10 and 25 is in 1. And now that will kind of tell our user what they're seeing on their screen instead of it just being a random number. So we have just created our first method. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. Of course, I'm throwing some words around that you haven't heard of before, but as you practice and do more methods, it'll start to click a little bit more. So let's go ahead and dig a little deeper into this. So let's look at this example, right? We have a method at the top that has two variables, x and y. Okay, so as you know, you can work with variables within your program. So let's say we wanted to print out variables. And we want to print out x and y. So I'm going ahead and do my print statement, and then I'm going to say that I want to print out the value of x. So once you see I type x, it's giving me an error. Now you're thinking, why is it giving me an error? Because x exists right here. So when you're working with methods, if you create a variable inside of a method, that is called a local variable. And your local variables only exist inside of that method. So when we're calling x in our main method, it does not know what x is because it has no visibility to that variable of x. It cannot see inside of the variable of x. So it's giving us an error. X only exists inside of here. X does not exist anywhere else outside of this program, so it's going to give us an error. So for us to fix this problem, we would have to create a x variable outside. So if you take a look here, it says here you can create a local variable x that would allow you to print it out. So for us to fix this, it would have to be int x equals, and we'll just put 1. And now our error goes away. So if we were to run this, we're going to see the value of 1 and not the value of 10. Because 10 is a local variable and it only exists within inside the method that we created it. So that is something you need to keep in mind. So typically, when you create a variable in a method, it only exists in there. So in the case that you wanted to work with the value of x, just make sure that you're paying attention to how these methods are created and where you're creating your variables. So you could create a variable of x outside of the method. So right here at the top of the class, we could create variable. So we could say int x equals 2. Right? Then, if we scroll down here and comment this out, then you see it's giving us an error, right? So we have an error. And it's saying change x to static. So if we were to do that, then you see it's changing x to static. And then if we scroll down, we now have that fixed. So when you click run, it's now giving us the value of 2. So when we use static up here, it's basically saying that we can use this variable anywhere. So static allows us to use the variable, anywhere within the class, okay? So now, in this case, you see here we created that variable of x, but this value of x is not used in our method. The value of x that is used within our method is still going to be 10 because we basically overrode the value of x when this is called. So any variable that you use in your method is going to take priority over any variable outside. So yes, you can have two variables of the same name, but when you're working with methods, whatever variables are within the method, so your local variables, are going to be the ones that take priority over the global variables, which are the ones outside. So any variables inside of your method are local. Any variables on outside of your method are going to be the global. So if you see here when we ran it, the value of this was 35 and it gave us 2 back, which is printing out this x when we called it down here. Now if you're curious how it would work, if we were to say that we wanted to pass in a value, then we can do that. So we could pass this value into our method to use it inside of there, but we're not doing that. So that's what we're going to do next. So we're going to go ahead and do a method with parameters. Okay? So parameters is basically the word that is used for any type of data that is being inputted into a method. So we can tell our program to insert data into our method instead of us just automatically having the data within our method. So this might be helpful in the cases of where you're asking the user to input a number using scanner, or just if there's a variable on the outside of your method that you want to use, similar to our value of x on line 5. So you can create a method with variables from outside of the method. All you had to do is pass it in. So passing in a value. So let's go ahead and create our method. So we'll say public, and then we'll do static, or actually no, let's do public, and we're not going to do static this time. We're just going to go ahead and show the other way of working with it. So we'll say public int subtract numbers. All right, so now we have that. So subtracting numbers. So we're going to go ahead and figure out how to subtract numbers here. Now remember, in this case I said I'm going to pass in some values. So up here I'm going to create another variable, and I'll put static int, and we'll put y equals 3. So now we have 2 and 3. And actually, I'm going to change this to N1 and N2 so we don't get confused with the X and Y and add numbers. So now we have 2 variables. So coming down here, if you want to create a method with parameters, you have to tell the method what it is accepting. In this case, we are going to be accepting integer values. So you would have to basically create a variable to represent the parameter of the data that's being passed in. So here's an example of that. The first thing you want to do is say int, because that's the data type that we're passing in. We're passing in an integer. And then you want to give it a name or a reference name like a variable. So we're going to use this name inside of our method. So in this case, this does not necessarily have to be whatever you want it to be on the outside. It can be anything you want as long as you remember. So I'm going to put int number 1, and we're going to have that here. And of course, if you're wondering what this is, if you take a look, it says you must return a result of type int. So in this case, what if we don't want to necessarily do a return statement? The other option you now have is to use the void. So we're going to go ahead and use void. So if you use void, then you see it adds public void here. It basically changes the return data type to void, meaning that it doesn't this method does not have to return anything to the user. So if you don't necessarily care about returning a specific data type to the user, you can use void. And void is just basically a placeholder to tell your program, I'm not returning a specific data type. So we're going to use void in this case. So now when we entered void, you see our problem has gone away. And we're going to continue to work with this. So now we have this data type that's working with passing in one parameter. We have one parameter, which is number 1. And if we want to work with this parameter, you would have to use it inside of your method. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's do print parameter value. So I'm going to go ahead and put our print statement, and then I'm going to pass in that value or our parameter, which is number 1. Okay, so this is a simple print statement to print out the value of our parameter, which is number 1. So if you see here, it matches. So to use the data that's inputted, you must use the exact name that you used in here. Now, can you assign this to another variable? Absolutely. You can assign your parameter value to a variable if you would like inside. So for example, you could put int x equals number 1. You could do that. In this case, I don't really want to do that to take up time, but just to make that little note there. So now we have this variable created with a parameter, and it is a void method. So it is just going to return, it doesn't tell us what type of data type we're returning. So let's scroll down and try to call it. So here it's just giving us a basically an error. So in this case, I will go ahead and add that back just for easy purposes to fix that error. And then we're going to call, hold on, let me add example 1 method. We're going to call, let me put up here so you can see example 2. So now we're going to call the example 2 method down here. Example 2 method call. So here, let's see how we would do this. So first I'm going to do subtract numbers to start off our method call. And we're going to build up our method call from here. So when you're working with this method, of course you need to use your empty parentheses to tell the program that it is a method we're working with. And obviously it's going to end in a semicolon in some way. However, when we're calling this, because this method takes in a parameter, you must enter a value into this parameter. So in this case, we have the values up here of N1 and N2. So for this case, I already used N1 here, so I'm going to change this to num1 for example purposes, num1. And so let's say I want to pass in num or n1 from the top. So we have n1 here. So let's say I want to work with n1 from up here. So let me scroll back down and we'll go ahead and put in n1. So we're still getting our error message, of course. In this case, if you click on our error, it's telling us to change it to static. So to change the actual variable to static. So if you do that, it'll add static in front of the void. And now that fixes our problem in this case. So to go ahead and show you how this runs, we'll go ahead and click run. And now you see the value of 2 is coming out. And remember, the value of 2 is coming from n1, which is a static value at the top of our code here. So it's printing out 2 for us. So we have a static variable working alongside a static method. So that is this portion of it as well. So this is another way you can create it. So here we have a return statement being used in this method. So we have a static method here, and we're using a return statement. In this one, we didn't necessarily want to use a return statement. So we use the keyword void. That will allow you to work with methods without having to return a value. So I'm going to put here, no return statement required. All right. So that's another example of how you can use methods. Our last example we're going to work with is going to be utilizing methods and objects. So to show how we use methods and objects, I plan to show that in the next video. So for now, I just want you to practice what we learned so far, and then we will continue on with methods in the next video.